Are we building good, lasting friendships around what's important? It's not a very commonly taught doctrine, the doctrine of friends. It almost sounds like the teachings of a 90s sitcom, but that's not what it is. The doctrine of friends is what the Bible has to say about one of God's greatest gifts, and that is the gift of friendship between two individuals. It's not just a generic thing to be assumed. In fact, quite to the contrary, Sesame Street destroyed this word, right? It was at Sesame Street when the blue monster would come on and say, "Hi, friends." Like, be quiet, Elmo. I don't even know you. You don't know my mom's name. You don't know what I like. You don't know anything about me. How dare you call me a friend? But our language has been so perverted that now we just kind of think that anyone who's not an enemy is a friend. But that's not the way the Bible uses the word friend, and that's not, hopefully, the way we should consider it. Because really, MySpace was a website that came up, and then they had you rank your friends, which caused many friendships to be destroyed. You had to have like your best friend, your first friend, your second friend, all for the world to see. It was a horrible idea. And then Facebook came along and made it even worse, right? Because every contact on Facebook is what? A friend. You get a friend request from someone halfway across the world who you've never met before and you're never going to meet, but now you're friends? Oh, Codswallop, it's ridiculous. A friend is something more than just an acquaintance. A friend is a serious bond between two people, and friendship is not something that happens every day. Now, I'm not suggesting that we become grammar Nazis and correct people for calling each other friends, but I want it to be clear in our mind that there needs to be close, intimate, and growing relationships for each of us. So let's learn what the Bible has to say in just a short study on friendship and on friends. First of all, we see that a friend supports. Genesis 38:12 says, "Now after a considerable time, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died, and when the time of mourning was ended, Judah went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hira the Adulamite." So here his friend is here with him at this time of mourning, and he's involved in helping and supporting him. Psalm 35:14 says, "I went about as though it were my friend or brother. I bowed down in mourning like one who mourns for a mother." Now, in the context of this psalm, the psalmist is talking about how these people despise him, but he loved them as a friend. He loved them with God's love. So he's kind of pointing something out that's a little bit different. But what we want to notice is that this is a mark of friendship in his mind, is mourning with them, is suffering with them, is supporting with them in that. Psalm 41:9 says, "Even a close friend whom I trusted, who I ate bread with, he lifted up his heel against me." We know this is a prophecy, as well as being an experience of David's, a prophecy of Judas's betrayal of Jesus. And you know that a friendship is deep when the betrayal, or any betrayal within that, or the thought of betrayal, is more than just sad. It's deeply hurtful. It's crushing when you're betrayed by a true friend, someone you've loved and trusted. So a friend is designed to support, and it's a dysfunction of friendship to have betrayal. Acts 24:23 here, this is about Paul in prison. It says, "And so he commanded the centurion to keep Paul and let him have liberty, and told him not to forbid any of his friends to provide for or visit him." Now, prison in this day was less pleasant than today. And if you were going to eat, then other people had to come and bring you food to provide, because if you weren't, the state wasn't going to pay to feed you. If you were in prison, it was your job to get your own food. And one of the ways it could be made difficult for you is if they discouraged people from coming in to feed you. And so here, it's noted that it was Paul's friends who were expected to care for and feed him in his difficult time of this imprisonment. So the first thing we see that a friend is meant to do, as we are friends to others and as we gather around meaningful friendships and identify who's going to be those friends that you're going to invest in with more of your time, you're looking for someone who you want to support and someone who supports you. That is part of the job or the function of a friend. But that's not all. A friend also influences you. Proverbs 27:9 says, "Oil and perfume make the heart glad, and a person's advice is sweet to his friend. Do not abandon your friend or your father's friend, and do not go to your brother's house on the day of disaster. Better is a neighbor who is near than a brother far away." So he's pointing out this person's advice is sweet to his friend. When you have a friendship, a mutual love and care and respect, your words all of a sudden weigh more in their life. And so, hopefully, you collect people around you who have good, godly advice to give you. Even more to the point, Proverbs 22, 24, and 25 says, "Make no friendship with an angry man, and with a furious man do not go, lest you learn his ways and set a snare for your soul." So what's he saying? He's saying that whoever you run with, whoever you spend most of your time with, is going to influence the way that you live your life. Even if you don't necessarily think of yourself as looking up to that person, they're going to affect you because that's how we are as humans. We surround ourselves with people with certain thoughts, attitudes, and behaviors. In this case, being angry or furious as a way of being. He's saying, the proverb writer Solomon says, don't even associate with that guy. Don't spend most of your time with him, because you'll become like him. You'll learn his ways. So a friend influences you. This is why friends are so important. If you have good, godly friends, then they're going to influence you towards good, godly living in life and discourage you from sinful behaviors, from things that tear you away from the Lord. Your friendships matter. Who you spend time with matters. It's, many times we'll say to children as they go off onto the playground, you choose your friends. Don't let your friends choose you. In other words, you actively choose who you want to spend time with, who you're going to identify with and associate with. But it's no less important for us as adults. We can fall into kind of lazy happenstance relationships of convenience or even just time and not look for relationships, true friendships that are spiritually growing and thriving and influencing us to be more godly as well. You can come in and listen to a boatload of sermons. You can listen to sermons 10 hours a day and all the other hours be listening to the Bible on tape. But if you're not around other believers who are spurring you on and encouraging you on in this deep central context of friendship, then you're missing out on half of the growth that you could be experiencing. But with all that said, and in all the praise and glory of friendship that the Lord has given us by his grace, we have to note that the Bible is consistent in its message that a friendship must not be held above the Lord. Exodus 32:27 says, "And he says to them, this is what the Lord your God of Israel says, every man of you put his sword in his thigh and go back and forth from the gate to gate in the camp and kill every man his brother and every man his friend and every man his neighbor." This was part of the judgment, right? Moses had gone up onto the mountain. And when he was up on the mountain, they committed idolatry, right? They built up the golden calf and said, "Here, behold Israel, the gods who led you out of Egypt." And part of that judgment was that the Levites who had not worshipped the idol were called upon to kill indiscriminately quite a large number of the Israelites in part of God's judgment. Sounds harsh. But it shows us, and this isn't, of course, a regular command. It's a very unique time and a very unique command in the Bible's history. But it shows us that God expects our allegiance before any friend or family to be to him. Deuteronomy 13:6 likewise says, "If your brother, your mother's son, or your daughter, or your wife you cherish, or your friend who is like your own soul entices you secretly, saying, 'Let's go and serve other gods, whom neither you nor your fathers have known.'" And it goes on to talk about how you deal with them and judge them. But the point is that friendships are powerful, but they cannot overpower your sway or your fidelity to the Lord. That's holding a friendship in idolatry. So we want to make sure we understand this in a holistic way. We need to have and be cultivating and investing in these deep and important friendships. It's an important part of having a fulfilling, natural life in the church, in life. But also we need to recognize not to hold those relationships above the Lord. And we see this very frequently. We see people going to churches and they'll say things like, "Well, I know it's not doctrinally very sound. I know it's not biblically very correct, but I've got such great friends there, and I don't want to leave my great friends." See, that's no good. That's really no good. You can go to a place that has the nicest, best fellowship meals and best small group fun that you could ever offer, but if it's not moving you faithfully towards the Lord, then that is actually detrimental to your growth. Now, it's not to suggest that a church can't be doctrinally sound and warm. I hope that you have friends here. But the reality is it's such an important connection that many, many people go to a church that they know to be a lousy church because they got buddies there, because they got friends there. It shows how powerful the sway of relationships can be on our lives. Next, we find a friend loves. Genesis 38:20 says, when Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adullamite, to receive the pledge from the woman's hand. This is a very sensitive situation. You remember Judah had visited a prostitute, something that he certainly should have done. It was a bit of an embarrassing situation, but he had his friend to count on. His friend was able to support him even in this sensitive and embarrassing time. Proverbs 17:17 says, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. Friend loves at all times. A friend is showing and living out that unconditional love of Christ in a context of two relationships. I love this one. Proverbs 27:6 says, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. You see, this is a lot of what we're going to see in Job coming up. As again, we're going to criticize some of the statements. God actually is going to criticize some of the statements that Job's friends make, but they're made in love. They're made because Job's friends love him and care for him and think this is what he needs to hear. Now, they're wrong in a lot of these cases, but it doesn't change the fact that they are made, these are wounds that are made because they believe that this is what Job needs to hear, because they care for him enough to say the hard words. They care for him enough to speak the truth, or at least what they think is the truth, even though they know it's going to cause him pain. Right? A true friend, rather, is the one who loves you enough not to walk on eggshells around you, but to speak the truth and help you grow as a person. Which means that we need to open ourselves up to our friends to make such wounds in our lives, to speak truthfully and honestly about us. We could go on for several studies, which of course we won't, about David and Jonathan. David and Jonathan are kind of the best friends pair possibly in the whole Bible. I'm sure we could find some exceptions. But David, who has been anointed to be king, he's a great warrior before the Lord, and Saul's son Jonathan should be in the most violent competition, because Jonathan is next up for the crown as far as being the son of Saul, but David has been announced or anointed by God to be the next king, and he's clearly showing himself every step of the way. Yet in spite of this, they gain the closest friendship, the most intimate brotherhood between them that they can have. So here, David says, I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You have been a close friend to me. Your love for me was more wonderful than the love of women. What's he saying? He's saying, I was so close to Jonathan. Jonathan was such a great friend. And as you know, David's life was filled with quite a handful of women, and not all of them perfectly faithful. Michal specifically was not to speak of. But Jonathan was always there, no matter what Saul was trying to do. He was always with him. They spent time together. They fought together. They worked together. They served together. They were undividable. We couldn't talk about friendship. I mean, we talk about all these wonderful things about how friendship's about loving and being available and open, spending time and all these things, but we couldn't skip this without noting the term or the idea of being a friend of God. You see, 2 Chronicles 27 says, did you not, our God, drive out the inhabitants of this land and your people Israel and give it to the descendants of your friend Abraham forever? God gave us this great institution of friendship that we should cherish, that we should seek out, that we should be constantly trying to grow and build better, deeper, more lasting friendships. And then he said, okay, now you got the idea. I'm Abraham's friend. That's a big statement. Obviously, Abraham in a special place. He's again in Isaiah 41:8. God refers to Abraham. He says, the descendants of Abraham, my friend. God had an intimate, personal relationship with Abraham. Exodus 33:11 talks about Moses in a similar manner. It says, so the Lord spoke to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend. You see, you'd imagine talking to God as being just sort of a take dictation moment, wouldn't you? I mean, Kind of how I would imagine it if I was sitting in the presence of God. Brad, what do you think? Nothing. Just tell me what I think. After all, you're God. And yet God wanted to and did speak to Moses as a friend. That means they spoke back and forth. I don't know if they tossed ideas around, but I do know that Moses saved the entire nation of Israel because God spoke to him as a friend. Remember, God said, I'm going to wipe all those guys out. And Moses said, whoa, 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 Lord. Then, your reputation will be soiled amongst the Egyptians and the people of the land. Of course, God was testing Moses, but it doesn't change the fact that God involved Moses in this process. Matthew 11:19 gets even more interesting. Talking about Jesus, as the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a wine-bibber, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is justified by her children. They meant it as an insult, of course, but it was a truth. Jesus was a friend to those tax collectors and sinners, those shunned by society, those outcasts, the losers of that world. He was a friend to them. He didn't just teach them, but he related with them. He opened up his life to them. He invited them to be with him, and he wasn't ashamed to be associated with him. That is a powerful statement of the character of Jesus, and hopefully the character of us when we consider who we will and won't befriend and what sort of metrics we put on that. Lastly, and most importantly, I direct our attention to John 15:13. Jesus speaking again says, greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. You are my friends if you do whatever I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all the things that I heard from my Father, I have made known to you. Did you catch it? Jesus made an incredible statement. He calls, I believe that this can be rightly appropriated to all of us in the church, he calls us his friends. Why are we friends? Because he's told us what he's doing. He's told us, he's not just given us marching orders. He's told us the whole plan. He's told us what this church age is meant to look like. He's told us what we're meant to be doing. He's told us what to expect next and what comes after that and what comes after that and then what comes after that. He's given us the whole picture and made us willing participants in his plan. He confides in us in his word. He listens to us through prayer. He is actively involved in us, and he wants you and I to consider ourselves the most shocking thing and the most audacious claim we could ever make. He wants you to know that you too, if you've trusted in Christ, are a friend of God. It's a big deal. So I want to challenge you as we consider this, one, to recognize that you're a friend of God. How does that friendship go? Are you listening to him through his word? Are you talking to him in prayer? Are you casting your cares and anxieties on him? Are you asking for advice, for help, for guidance? Are you asking for help as he wants you to? Are you relying on his resources as the one who's befriended you? Going further out, have you built a new friendship recently? Have you invested in your good friendships? And by that I mean, have you grown in the Lord together with a brother and sister in the Lord? Maybe just one friend, maybe just two. But are you building those meaningful, lasting relationships surrounding the Word, surrounding prayer, surrounding the real circumstances and emotional realities of your life? It's a great danger for all of us to become closed off and sort of spiritually shuttered in and not letting anyone into our private world. Neither am I suggesting that we become, ridiculous, overexposed people who are overly familiar and intimate with everybody, pretending like we have no boundaries or no private life at all. But we're meant to be building meaningful relationships.